$1,800 a month, Mom. If you want to stay, you pay rent.
So if I pay, I can stay?
For now.
My son slid a sheet of paper across the kitchen table and tapped the number at the bottom. $1,800 a month, Mom. If you want to keep living here, you need to start paying rent. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. This was my house. Richard and I had paid off the mortgage 12 years ago. I looked at Ethan. So if I pay this, I can stay for now. I wrote him a check for $800, but before handing it over, I made him write exactly what the payment was for and sign beneath it. The next morning, I locked my bedroom door, pulled an old business card from my drawer and dialed. Rebecca, I whispered, I think Ethan finally did exactly what you warned me he might do. Before I tell you what she said, tell me this. What would you do if your own child charged you rent to live in the home you spent your life paying for? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if stories about family dignity and knowing when to stand your ground mean something to you, please like and subscribe. I have a feeling you'll want to hear what happened after that phone call. 18 months before my son slid that rent demand across my kitchen table, I would have laughed if anyone had told me Ethan would someday charge me to live in my own home. Not because Ethan was perfect, no child is, but because I had spent 41 years believing there were certain lines my son would never cross. Back then, the worst thing in my life wasn't money or property or betrayal. It was grief. My husband Richard Thomas died on a cold Tuesday morning in January. We had been married for 43 years. 43 years is long enough for another person's habits to become part of the architecture of your life. Richard always woke before me. He made coffee too strong, left the newspaper folded beside my mug, and checked the back door twice before bed, even though we lived in one of the quietest neighborhoods in Worthington, Ohio. After he died, those little habits became ghosts. For the first few weeks, I still woke expecting to smell coffee. Sometimes I would turn toward his side of the bed before remembering there was nobody there. Our house had never seemed large while Richard was alive. Suddenly, every room echoed. We had bought that 2-story brick house more than 30 years earlier when Ethan was still a boy and Natalie was starting school. Richard was a construction engineer and I worked in payroll for a manufacturing company outside Columbus. We weren't wealthy. We were careful. There is a difference. We clipped coupons, we postponed vacations. Richard replaced things himself whenever he could. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening when the children were young trying to decide whether we could afford to repair the furnace without putting anything on a credit card. That was how we built our life. Slowly, one paycheck at a time. 12 years before Richard died, he made the final mortgage payment. He came home holding the confirmation letter over his head like he'd won the lottery. We own every brick now, Vicky. I laughed and told him the county would still find a way to send us a tax bill. He opened a cheap bottle of champagne anyway. That memory mattered later. At the time, I didn't understand just how much. After Richard's funeral, Ethan became my shadow. At first, I was grateful. He was 41, then married to Lauren and working as a sales manager for a home remodeling company. He lived about 25 minutes away, close enough that he could stop by after work. And he did, constantly. The first Saturday after the funeral, he arrived carrying groceries. "You don't need to keep doing this," I told him. "You're my mom." He put milk in the refrigerator and started checking expiration dates as if I had suddenly forgotten how food worked. I smiled. I even found it sweet. A week later, he fixed a loose railing on the porch. Then he replaced a burned-out light above the garage. Then he sat beside me while I tried to make sense of Richard's insurance paperwork. That was the part I struggled with most. Not because I couldn't understand numbers. I'd spent more than 30 years handling payroll. I could spot a discrepancy in a spreadsheet faster than most people could find their reading glasses. But Richard had always handled certain things at home. Insurance, utilities, property records, passwords. After his death, every envelope seemed to carry another reminder that he wasn't coming back. One afternoon, Ethan found me sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers. He pulled out the chair beside me. "Dad always handled everything," he said gently. "Let me take some weight off you." Those words almost broke me. I nodded. "Just until I get myself together." "Of course." That was how it started, not with threats, not with rent, with help. Ethan organized several bills. He showed me how to access accounts Richard had managed online. He called the insurance company when I couldn't stand listening to another stranger say, "I'm sorry for your loss." Every time Ethan handled something, I felt relieved. And every time I felt relieved, I handed him one more small piece of responsibility. Lauren began visiting more often, too. I had never been particularly close to my daughter-in-law, but we had always been civil. Lauren was a real estate agent, polished in the way some people seem polished even on Saturday mornings. She noticed houses the way I noticed numbers: square footage, roof age, kitchen finishes, neighborhood sales. One Sunday afternoon, she stood at my kitchen window looking toward the backyard. "This lot is bigger than I remembered," I shrugged. Richard liked having space. "You know what homes around here are selling for now?" "No." She turned toward me. "You'd be surprised. I didn't ask how much. She told me anyway. Then she started talking about inventory being low and buyers wanting established neighborhoods near Columbus." I remember laughing. "Well, that's nice for whoever's selling." Lauren smiled. "Exactly." Something about the way she said it made me look at her twice. But grief does strange things to your instincts. You notice something uncomfortable, then tell yourself you're being unfair. A few weeks later, Lauren brought it up again. We were sitting in the living room when she glanced toward the staircase. "This is a lot of house for one person, Victoria." "I've managed so far." "I don't mean you can't manage." She smiled quickly. "I'm just saying you don't need this much space anymore." That phrase stayed with me. Don't need. I had begun hearing it often. You don't need to worry about that bill. You don't need to call the insurance company. You don't need to keep all those papers. You don't need all this space. Each sentence sounded helpful by itself. Together they were beginning to form something I couldn't name yet. Still, I defended them in my own mind. Ethan was grieving too. He had lost his father. Lauren was probably trying to help him help me. And the truth was, I was tired. So when Ethan offered to take over a few more household tasks, I let him. He arranged for someone to clean the gutters. He called about a property tax question. He changed the automatic payment on one utility account after Richard's old card expired. Then one afternoon I opened my email and discovered the electric bill had been switched to paperless statements. I hadn't requested that. I called Ethan. "Oh, I did it," he said casually. "Why?" "It's easier." "For whom?" There was a brief silence. Then he laughed. "Mom, you're making this sound like a federal investigation." "I'm asking a question." I was trying to help. I immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry, I know you are." "It's okay." But after we hung up, I sat staring at my laptop. It was such a tiny thing. A utility bill. Nothing worth fighting over. Yet something about it bothered me. Richard had always asked before changing anything that affected both of us. Not because he needed permission, because we were partners. Ethan hadn't asked. A month later, I discovered he had also changed the contact number on the landscaping account to his cell phone, again without telling me. When I mentioned it, he gave me the same answer. "I'm just making things easier." I wanted to believe him, so I did. Or perhaps I chose to. There's a painful difference between not seeing something and seeing it but refusing to give it a name. Natalie called me one evening from Indianapolis. "How are you really doing, Mom?" "I'm okay." "And the house?" "Fine. Ethan's been helping with everything." There was a pause. "Everything?" I laughed. "Don't sound so suspicious." "I'm not." She was. I could hear it. "Your brother is taking care of me," I said. "I know." Another pause. "Just make sure he's helping you, Mom, not replacing you." I didn't like that. "That's unfair." "Maybe. Ethan has been wonderful since your father died." "Okay." Natalie dropped it. I wish she hadn't, because by then Ethan knew the passwords to 3 household accounts. His phone number was listed on 2 services. He knew where Richard had kept our insurance records. He knew which drawer held our property tax statements. And somehow, without any conversation, I could remember agreeing to my son had begun speaking to contractors about my house before they spoke to me. The change happened so gradually that I couldn't identify the moment help became management, but I remember the first time I truly felt it. A repairman came to inspect a leak near the upstairs bathroom. I opened the door and introduced myself. He smiled politely and glanced at his clipboard. "Oh, I was told to speak with Ethan Thomas." I stared at him. "About what?" "The property." "The property. Not my home, not Mrs. Thomas's house. The property." I stepped aside and let him in. But that evening I sat alone at the same kitchen table where Richard and I had once celebrated paying off our mortgage. For the first time since my husband died, I wasn't thinking about how empty the house felt without him. I was thinking about something else. My son had come into my life saying he wanted to carry some of my burden. Somewhere along the way he had started carrying my authority with it, and I had no idea yet how much more he intended to take. For several weeks after the repairman called my home the property, I tried to convince myself I was being overly sensitive. Grief had made me suspicious of change. That was what I told myself. Ethan was my son. He had brought me groceries when I could barely remember to eat. He had sat beside me while I cried over Richard's insurance forms. Surely a few changed phone numbers and paperless bills weren't evidence of anything sinister. Then Ethan came over one Saturday morning carrying a blue folder. "I want to make things easier if something happens," he said. I was standing at the kitchen counter slicing apples. What exactly is supposed to happen? Nothing, hopefully. He opened the folder. Inside was a limited financial power of attorney. I looked at him. "Why do you need this? I don't need it." "You do." That answer bothered me immediately. Ethan explained that if I became sick, had an accident, or simply needed him to handle something while I was unavailable, the document would allow him to deal with certain financial matters without endless phone calls and authorization forms. "Mom, this is normal. I know what a power of attorney is." He smiled. "Right. Of course you do." I hated the smile more than the words. It was the kind of patient expression people use when they think someone older needs to be reassured. I had spent more than 30 years managing payroll deductions, tax, withholding retirement contributions, and audits. Numbers had never frightened me, and neither had paperwork, so I read every page. Ethan sat across from me, tapping his fingers against the table. The authority was limited. It allowed him to assist with specified financial and administrative matters. Nothing I read transferred ownership of my home to him. Nothing gave him the right to sell it for his own benefit. I pointed to one section. "This doesn't make you an owner of anything. I know. And it doesn't mean you make decisions without me. Obviously." "Then we're clear." He leaned back. "Mom, I'm trying to help you, not steal your house." I hadn't accused him of that. The fact that he said it stayed with me. Still, I signed. At the time, I believed I was putting a spare key in my son's hand. I didn't realize he might eventually start behaving as though the key meant the house belonged to him. After that, the changes accelerated. Ethan suggested consolidating passwords. He wrote several of them into a password manager and told me it would be safer than keeping Richard's old handwritten list. Then he moved another utility account to paperless billing. He began checking whether my property taxes had been paid before I did. Whenever I questioned him, his answer was always some version of the same thing. "I already handled it." At first, those words brought relief. Eventually, they irritated me. Lauren became more interested too. One evening, she walked through the kitchen while I was preparing dinner and ran her fingertips over the countertop. "These are dated," she said. "They still work." "I know. I'm just thinking about resale. I stopped chopping onions." "Resale." She turned quickly. "Eventually, Victoria, every house gets sold eventually, not while I'm living in it." She gave a small laugh. "Of course not." But she had already opened one cabinet. "You'd get a much stronger price with updated hardware." "Lauren," she looked at me, "I'm not selling my house." She raised both hands. "I'm just talking." That became another phrase I learned to distrust. Just talking, just helping, just making things easier. Each phrase was harmless until enough of them were stacked together. A few days later, Ethan came over after work. Lauren joined us for dinner. I made pot roast mashed potatoes and green beans, the same meal Ethan used to request on his birthday when he was a teenager. For a little while, things felt normal. We talked about football, Natalie's work, and a remodeling project Ethan's company had just completed. After dinner, I carried plates into the kitchen. Lauren and Ethan stayed in the dining room. I had started the faucet when I realized I'd left my glasses beside my plate. I walked back toward the doorway. Then I heard Lauren say my name. I stopped. Not deliberately at first. Then I heard the rest. "Your mother is sitting on almost $500,000. There was no mistaking what she meant. "My house." Ethan lowered his voice. "She's not going anywhere right now. I know that. Then stop pushing." "I'm not pushing. I'm being realistic." A chair scraped softly against the floor. Lauren continued. "You know how much equity is just sitting here." I felt something cold move through my stomach. Equity. Not memories. Not 30 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings. Not the bedroom where Richard had spent his final weeks. Equity. Ethan sighed. "Lauren, what? Just give me time." Silence. I stood outside that dining room with one hand resting against the wall. "Just give me time." Time for what? For me to agree to sell for grief to make me easier to persuade. For him to gain more control. I could have walked into the room. Part of me wanted to. I imagined asking them exactly what they were discussing and watching their faces change. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades catching payroll errors by noticing what didn't belong, told me not to move. Information disappears when people realize you're watching. So I stepped backward. I returned to the kitchen, turned the faucet louder, and waited. A minute later, they came in. Lauren carried 2 glasses. "Need help?" "No, thank you." Ethan kissed my cheek. "Dinner was great, Mom." I looked at my son. His face was completely ordinary. That hurt more than if he'd looked guilty. After they left, I walked through the house alone. I passed the pencil marks inside the laundry room doorway where Richard had measured Ethan and Natalie as children. I touched the banister Richard had refinished himself. Then I went upstairs. On my dresser sat a photograph from our 35th wedding anniversary. Richard had his arm around me, smiling into the camera. I picked it up. "What are they doing, Richard?" The room gave me no answer. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing Lauren's voice, almost $500,000, and Ethan's answer, "Just give me time." The next morning, Ethan called. "Hey, Mom, I'm going to stop by later. I need to check a couple things with the house." Normally, I would have said yes without thinking. Instead, I asked, "What things?" There was a pause. "Nothing important." "Then tell me." Another pause. "Insurance, maintenance, stuff like that." I looked through my kitchen window at the backyard Richard and I had planted together. "All right." After we hung up, I remained beside the phone. Something had changed inside me. I wasn't ready to accuse my son. I wasn't even ready to admit what I feared. But I was ready to start paying attention. For the first time since Richard died, I opened a small notebook and wrote down the date. Underneath it, I wrote 4 words, "Ethan coming about house." I didn't know it then, but that simple note was the beginning of something Ethan never expected. He thought grief had made me dependent. What he had forgotten was that before I became his widowed mother, I had spent decades making sure every number accounted for itself, and now I was beginning to account for him. Once I started paying attention, I realized how many decisions about my home were already being made without me. The first was the lawn service. Richard and I had used the same small landscaping company for nearly 9 years. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, knew exactly which hydrangeas Richard had planted and which section of the backyard turned muddy after heavy rain. One Tuesday morning, a different truck pulled into my driveway. 2 men unloaded equipment. I stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" One of them smiled. "We're here for the weekly service. I already have a lawn service." He checked his phone. "Ethan Thomas set this up." Of course he had. I called Ethan immediately. "Why did you change my landscaper? Because Alvarez was charging too much." "Did I ask you to find someone cheaper?" "No, but then why didn't you ask me?" His tone hardened slightly. "Mom, this is exactly why I'm helping. You shouldn't have to worry about every little thing." I wasn't worried. I saved you money. That was how Ethan had learned to end arguments. If his decision saved money, then questioning it made me unreasonable. 2 weeks later, he scheduled a contractor to inspect my kitchen windows without asking me. Then he canceled a gutter cleaning appointment I'd already arranged because he had found someone better. Each incident was small enough to sound ridiculous if I complained about it, but together they created a pattern. My house was slowly becoming a project Ethan managed. Then Lauren brought strangers into it. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was folding towels upstairs when I heard voices downstairs. I expected Ethan. Instead, when I reached the landing, I saw Lauren standing in my foyer with a couple I had never met. The woman appeared to be in her 40s. The man was looking toward my living room windows. Lauren smiled when she saw me. "Victoria, I hope you don't mind." I descended slowly. "Mind what?" "These are friends of mine, Kevin and Melissa. They love older homes." Melissa gave me an embarrassed smile. "You have a beautiful place. Thank you." Lauren was already moving toward the living room. "Wait until you see the backyard." Something about her voice made the hair rise on my arms. It was her professional voice. I'd heard Lauren speak that way about houses before, warm, effortless selling without appearing to sell. She pointed toward the built-in shelves, original woodwork, then toward the dining room. Great natural light in the afternoon. I followed them. Kevin glanced toward the ceiling. "How old is the roof?" Lauren answered before I could. "About 8 years. I stopped walking. Why did her friend need to know the age of my roof?" They moved into the kitchen. Melissa looked at the cabinets. These could be updated. Lauren nodded. Cosmetic, nothing major. I stared at my daughter-in-law. For one surreal moment, I felt invisible in my own kitchen. Finally, I said, "Lauren." She turned. "Can I speak to you?" "Sure. Alone." Kevin and Melissa suddenly became very interested in the backyard. I lowered my voice. "What exactly are you doing?" Lauren blinked. "I told you. They're friends. Friends who ask about my roof. They're homeowners, Victoria. People talk about houses, then talk about theirs." Her smile disappeared. "You're making this uncomfortable." "No. You made it uncomfortable when you brought strangers into my house without asking." She folded her arms. "I didn't realize I needed permission to bring friends over. You don't live here." The words landed harder than I expected. Lauren stared at me. Then she smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course." She collected Kevin and Melissa, and within 5 minutes they were gone. I called Ethan that evening. Did you know Lauren brought people here today? Yeah, she mentioned it. She walked them through the house. They're friends. That's what she said. Then what's the problem? I tightened my grip on the phone. Is Lauren trying to sell my house? Ethan laughed, not nervously, dismissively. Mom, come on, answer me. No one is selling your house. Then why are strangers asking about my roof? You've been under a lot of stress. I went silent. There it was. Not an answer. An explanation for why my question shouldn't be trusted. Don't do that, I said. Do what make this about my state of mind. I'm worried about you. I asked about the house, and I answered, no, he hadn't. After we hung up, I wrote everything in my notebook. Date, time, names, questions they had asked. Ethan's exact words. 3 days later, I found the first piece of evidence that told me my instincts weren't wrong. Lauren had stopped by to drop off some insurance papers. She stayed 20 minutes, drank coffee, then left for an appointment. An hour later, I noticed a black folder beside the chair where she'd been sitting. I picked it up to check whether it contained anything she needed urgently. Then I saw my address, printed across the top of the first page. My stomach tightened. It was a comparative market analysis. I knew enough about real estate to understand what I was looking at. Recent sales, comparable homes, square footage, estimated market range, projected value after cosmetic improvements, $475,000. Possibly more with kitchen updates. There were handwritten notes in the margins, refinish floors, neutral paint, hardware, declutter. One note stopped me cold, potential strong spring listing. I sat down. They weren't casually wondering what my home was worth. Someone was preparing for the possibility of selling it. I wanted to call Ethan immediately. I wanted to call Lauren and demand an explanation. Instead, I remembered the words I'd written in my notebook. Pay attention. So I took out my phone. I photographed every page. The comparable properties, the estimated price, the renovation notes, even Lauren's handwriting. Then I carefully closed the folder. I placed it exactly where she'd left it. 20 minutes later, Lauren called. Victoria, did I leave a black folder there? Yes. A pause. Did you open it? I looked toward the kitchen where Richard and I had once toasted our final mortgage payment. No, I said quietly. Why would I? Her relief traveled through the phone. Oh, good. It's just work stuff. I'll grab it later. Work stuff. I almost smiled. For weeks, Ethan and Lauren had treated me as though age and grief had made me incapable of noticing what was happening around me. Maybe that was their biggest mistake, because I wasn't going to ask them what they were planning anymore. I was going to let them show me. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether the most important question wasn't why my son wanted control of my house. It was whether Ethan had somehow convinced himself he already had it. Natalie arrived from Indianapolis the following Friday, carrying an overnight bag, 2 containers of soup, and the expression she had worn since childhood, whenever she knew something was wrong but hadn't yet decided how hard to push. My daughter had always been different from Ethan. Where Ethan filled silence, Natalie studied it. She hugged me in the foyer, stepped back, and looked directly into my face. Okay, she said. What's going on? I forced a smile. Hello to you too, Mom. I'm fine. You've said I'm fine 3 times on the phone this week. I am. She didn't argue. That worried me more than if she had. That evening, we ate at the kitchen table. I deliberately avoided mentioning Lauren's folder. I wasn't ready to turn suspicion into a family war. Natalie told me about her patients at the rehabilitation center, where she worked as an occupational therapist. I listened, asked questions, and tried to behave normally. Then my phone rang. Ethan, I answered. Hi. Hey, Mom. Did the contractor call about the windows? No. I'll follow up Monday. You don't need to. I've already got it. I glanced across the table. Natalie was watching me. Ethan, they're my windows. I know. Then let me handle them. Silence. Okay, he said finally, if that's what you want. After I hung up, Natalie put down her fork. How much is Ethan handling? Not this again. I'm asking. He's helping with some things. What things? Bills, maintenance, insurance, your bank accounts? No. That answer came too quickly. Natalie noticed. Passwords, he knows some. Property documents, he helped after your father died. Natalie leaned back. Mom, why does Ethan need this much access? He doesn't have access to everything. That's not what I asked. I felt irritation rising. He's your brother. He stepped up when I needed him. I know. Then stop treating him like a criminal. I didn't call him a criminal. You're implying it. Natalie was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked something that changed the direction of everything. Mom, do you actually know what Ethan thinks he owns? I stared at her. What, the way he talks about this house? You've barely heard him talk about it. I've heard enough. She lowered her voice. Last month he told me you were sitting on too much equity. My stomach tightened. Lauren had used almost the same words. What exactly did he say? That keeping a $500,000 house for one person wasn't practical. I looked away. Natalie saw the change in my face. What happened? Nothing. Mom. I said nothing. She reached across the table. I am not asking you to choose between your children. I'm asking you to protect yourself. That night, long after Natalie went to bed, I walked into Richard's old office. For months after his death, I had avoided changing anything there. His books still filled the shelves. His old drafting ruler remained beside the desk. A faded Ohio State mug held 3 pens that had probably dried out years ago. I opened the filing cabinet, insurance, taxes, vehicle records. Then I reached the bottom drawer. The estate binder should have been there. It was dark blue, thick with tabs separating Will's beneficiary information trust papers and other documents Rebecca Mitchell had prepared for us 6 years earlier. I remembered Richard placing it there. Important originals stay together, he'd said. The space was empty. I searched again. Then the desk. Then the closet. Nothing. My heartbeat began to quicken. I stood in the center of the office trying to remember the last time I'd seen it. Months earlier. After Richard died, Ethan had come into this room looking for insurance documents. I'd given him the spare key because I couldn't face sorting through Richard's papers myself. He had spent nearly an hour in here. That didn't prove anything. I repeated that sentence several times. It didn't prove anything. But neither did Lauren's market analysis. Neither did the changed accounts. Neither did the strangers walking through my kitchen. Neither did just give me time. Each piece was innocent if I looked at it alone. Together they frightened me. Natalie appeared in the doorway wearing her robe. Mom, I jumped. What are you doing up? I heard drawers opening. She saw the files scattered across the desk. What are you looking for? I hesitated. Our estate binder. And I can't find it. Natalie's face changed. When did you last see it? I don't remember. Does Ethan know where you kept it? I looked at her. That was enough of an answer. Natalie stepped into the room. Call him. No. Mom, if he has it and I call him now, what happens? She stopped. I wasn't sure myself until I said it aloud. If there's an innocent explanation, I'll get it eventually. If there isn't, I don't want him knowing I'm looking. Natalie stared at me with something between surprise and relief. Okay. I pulled out Richard's desk chair and sat down. For the first time in months, I felt less like a frightened widow and more like the woman who had spent 32 years overseeing payroll records. At work, when numbers didn't match, I never accused anyone first. I documented, I verified. I followed the trail. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and found a yellow legal pad. Then I reconsidered. Too obvious. Instead, I went upstairs and retrieved the small notebook where I'd already recorded Ethan's visits. I added the missing binder. I wrote the date I remembered giving Ethan the office key. Then I listed everything else. Changed utility billing, landscaping account, contractors, Lauren's visitors, comparative market analysis, nearly $500,000 estimated value. I backed up the photographs from Lauren's folder to a private email account Ethan didn't know existed. Natalie watched from the doorway. You've done this before, she said. Not with my own family. That was the part that hurt. I could investigate an accounting discrepancy without emotion. I couldn't do that with my son. Every note I wrote felt like an accusation against the boy whose first bicycle Richard and I had bought after saving for 3 months. But love couldn't erase what I was seeing. Before Natalie left Sunday afternoon, she hugged me tightly. Promise you'll call if anything changes, I promise. And don't sign anything without reading it. I almost smiled. You're talking to a retired payroll supervisor. I'm talking to my mother. After her car disappeared down the street, I went back inside and locked the door. Then I opened my notebook. At the top of a clean page, I wrote one question. What does Ethan believe he has the right to do? I didn't have the answer yet. But less than 2 weeks later, my son would sit at my kitchen table and begin answering it for me. He would stop talking about helping with my house. He would start talking about what I owed him for living in it. And that was when suspicion became something much harder to ignore. 2 weeks after Natalie left, Ethan called and asked if he and Lauren could come by Sunday afternoon. He didn't say why. That alone made me uneasy. By then, I had learned that when Ethan wanted to fix a gutter or check an insurance statement, he simply announced it. When he formally asked to come over, it usually meant he wanted something from me. They arrived at 3. Lauren carried a leather folder. Ethan carried nothing. I made coffee out of habit. Neither of them touched it. Mom, Ethan began, we need to talk about the house. There it was again. The house. I folded my hands on the kitchen table. All right. He glanced at Lauren before continuing. The expenses here are getting unreasonable. What expenses? Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, landscaping, repairs. I pay the property taxes. I know. I pay the insurance, yes. And until you changed my landscaping company, I paid that too. Ethan sighed. That's not the point. Then what is? Lauren leaned forward. The point is that Ethan has been managing this property for months. I looked at her. Managing, coordinating contractors, watching expenses, making sure things don't fall behind. I didn't hire him as a property manager. No one said you did. You just called him one. Lauren's mouth tightened. Ethan stepped in. Mom, don't turn this into an argument. I asked a question. He rubbed his forehead. We're trying to make things sustainable. For whom? For everyone. That word made no sense. There was only one person living in the house. Me. I looked from Ethan to Lauren. What exactly are you asking me for? Ethan finally said it. You need to start contributing to the household costs. For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood. I already pay the household costs. You pay some. Name one regular household expense you're paying. He hesitated. Lauren answered instead. It's not just about checks, Victoria. There's management involved. I almost laughed. Management I never requested. Ethan's expression hardened. Mom, somebody has to be responsible. I am responsible. You're 69 years old. The room went silent. He seemed to realize immediately how it sounded. I didn't mean, yes, you did. I'm saying things change. What things Dad is gone. That one hurt. Ethan knew it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I looked toward Richard's empty chair at the far end of the kitchen. Ethan continued more quietly. You shouldn't have to manage a property this size by yourself. I've managed it for 18 months. With my help. Help isn't ownership. Lauren shifted in her chair. No one is talking about ownership? That was a lie. Maybe not legally, but emotionally, financially, practically, they had been talking about ownership for months. I remembered the comparative market analysis hidden in my private email. Nearly $500,000. I remembered the missing estate binder. Then Ethan slid a sheet of paper across the table. There was a number written near the bottom. Waller, 800. I stared at it. What is this a monthly amount? For what? Your continued occupancy? I looked up. My what? Lauren spoke in the calm tone she probably used with difficult clients. Think of it as a contribution toward maintaining the property. You mean rent? Neither answered. I repeated it. You're charging me rent. Ethan exhaled. If that's the word you want to use, what word would you use, Mom? Rent, Ethan? He looked directly at me. Yes. Something inside me went very still. Not angry, not yet, just still. I looked around the kitchen. Richard and I had remodeled it 20 years earlier. We'd lived with plywood countertops for 3 weeks because we refused to borrow money for upgrades we couldn't yet afford. I remembered Richard sitting at this same table 12 years ago, waving the mortgage payoff confirmation over his head. We own every brick now, Vicky. And now our son was telling me I needed to pay him for permission to remain inside those bricks. I looked back at Ethan. Who decided 1,800? I did. You did. Based on what comparable rentals cost, it's actually below market. That sounded like Lauren. I turned toward her. She didn't look away. Suddenly, I understood the language they'd been using. Property, equity, occupancy, management, comparable value. For months, they had been changing the words around me. And if you change the words long enough, perhaps you can convince yourself you've changed the truth. I was no longer a Victoria Thomas homeowner. I was an occupant. Ethan was no longer my son helping me. He was the person managing the property, and my home was no longer the place Richard and I had spent decades paying for. It was an asset. What happens if I don't pay? I asked. Ethan's expression softened, almost as though he was relieved I'd finally asked the practical question. We'd have to discuss other arrangements. What arrangements? There are good senior communities around Columbus. My throat tightened. You want me to move? I didn't say that. You just did. No, I'm saying this house may not be the best long-term situation. For me, for everybody. There was that word again, everybody. Lauren finally spoke. No one is throwing you out, Victoria. Not yet, I thought. But I didn't say it. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell Lauren to leave. I wanted to ask Ethan what his father would think of him sitting at that table and charging his mother rent. Instead, I remembered my notebook. I remembered 32 years of payroll audits. When something didn't make sense, emotion came second. Documentation came first, so I took the paper and read it carefully. There was no formal lease, no legal explanation, just Ethan's calculation of expenses and the amount he expected me to pay. $1,800 every month, I asked. Yes, and if I pay it, I stay. Ethan nodded, for now. Those 2 words changed everything, for now. That meant the rent wasn't the destination. It was another step. I folded the paper once and placed it in front of me. All right. Lauren blinked. Ethan stared at me. What I said, all right. You'll pay, yes. Their surprise told me they had expected tears, resistance, maybe a family argument they could later describe as evidence that I was becoming difficult. I gave them none of it. Ethan leaned back. I knew you'd understand. I almost smiled. He thought I understood his reasoning. I didn't. But I was beginning to understand his mistake. He wanted me to pay rent in my own house. Fine, I would pay him. Once. And when I did, I was going to make absolutely certain there was no confusion about what my son believed that money represented. The following Sunday, Ethan returned for the money. He came with Lauren again. That told me something. If this had truly been about helping me with household expenses, my son could have come alone. But Lauren sat beside him at my kitchen table with her purse on the chair and an expression that looked almost satisfied. I'd spent the previous week preparing. Not fighting, preparing. My notebook was hidden upstairs. The photographs of Lauren's comparative market analysis were backed up. I had also located old bank statements showing the final mortgage payments Richard and I had made years earlier. Most importantly, I had decided exactly how I would pay Ethan. Not cash, not an electronic transfer, a check. Something with a date, a recipient, an amount, and a memo line. Ethan glanced at the clock. Did you think about what we discussed? I did. And I told you I'd pay. Lauren smiled. I'm glad we're all being reasonable. I looked at her. Reasonable. She missed the warning in my voice. I opened my checkbook. Before writing anything, I pushed Ethan's sheet from the previous week toward him. I need you to add something. His eyebrows lifted. What the $1,800 is for? He stared at me. We already discussed that. I know. Then why does it matter? Because if I'm paying money, I want a record of what I'm paying for. Lauren leaned toward the paper. You could call it household contribution. I looked directly at Ethan. Is that what it is? He hesitated. You called it rent last week. It's basically the same thing. No, it isn't. The room became quiet. I kept my voice calm. You told me I was paying $1,800 a month for continued occupancy. You said if I paid, I could remain here. Is that still your position? Lauren shifted. Victoria, this doesn't have to become adversarial. I'm asking Ethan a question. He looked annoyed now. Yes, it's rent. Then write that. He stared at me for several seconds. I could almost see him calculating whether my request mattered. Then arrogance made the decision for him. He picked up a pen. On the bottom of the paper, Ethan wrote $1,800 rent for continued occupancy of residence. Happy sign it. Lauren frowned. Why? Because he's receiving the money. Ethan gave a short laugh. Fine. He signed his name beneath the sentence. Then he slid the paper back. I wrote the check. Ethan Thomas. $1,800. On the memo line, I wrote rent residence. I tore it out and placed it on the table. Ethan picked it up. That was the moment. My son had just accepted rent from me for permission to remain in the home Richard and I had spent decades buying. I expected to feel furious. Instead, I felt something colder. Clarity. Lauren looked at the check. This makes things much cleaner going forward. Does it absolutely. She crossed one leg over the other. After 6 months, we can review whether $1,800 still makes sense. I slowly turned toward her. Review it. Market conditions change. There it was. She was already discussing raising my rent. Ethan shot her a quick look, but she continued. We're giving you a very favorable arrangement, Victoria. Giving me. I thought of the years Richard and I had skipped vacations to pay extra toward the mortgage. I thought of the night the furnace died. I thought of painting Ethan's childhood bedroom ourselves because hiring someone wasn't in the budget. And now Lauren believed they were giving me the privilege of staying there. I didn't argue. That unsettled Ethan. You okay, Mom? I'm fine. You're being quiet. Would you prefer I wasn't? No? He folded the check and put it into his wallet. That mattered too. He accepted it, voluntarily. No misunderstanding, no confusion, rent. Before they left, Ethan kissed my cheek. We're doing this because we want what's best for you. I looked at him. I know what you're telling yourself. His face changed slightly. What does that mean? Nothing. Lauren called from the foyer. Ethan, he followed her out. I stood at the window and watched them drive away. Then I moved. First I locked the front door. Next I took the signed paper upstairs. I photocopied it using the small printer in Richard's office. Then I scanned it. I saved one copy digitally and placed another inside an envelope with the photographs from Lauren's folder. After that I returned to the kitchen. My hands had started trembling. not from fear, from the realization that there was no longer any way to pretend. My son had crossed the line, and he had signed his name beneath it. I went upstairs again and opened the narrow drawer in my bedroom nightstand. At the back were old sympathy cards, Richard's spare watch, and several business cards held together with a rubber band. I sorted through them: dentist, accountant, insurance agent. Then I found it: Rebecca Mitchell, estate planning attorney. I hadn't spoken to Rebecca in years. She had worked with Richard and me when we'd reorganized our estate planning 6 years earlier. Richard trusted her. More importantly, Rebecca had once said something during one of our meetings that I had dismissed at the time. Authority given for convenience can become dangerous when someone starts confusing access with ownership. Richard had nodded. I'd laughed and said our children weren't like that. I wasn't laughing now. I sat on the edge of my bed holding Rebecca's card. Then I dialed. Her assistant answered. When I gave my name, I expected to be offered an appointment. Instead, less than a minute later, Rebecca came onto the line. "Victoria, it's been a long time. Yes, are you all right?" I looked at the signed paper beside me. "I don't know, what happened? My son has been handling some things since Richard died." "All right, and today he accepted $1,800 from me." For what I swallowed. "Rent?" Silence. Rebecca's voice changed. "Rent for where? My house." Another silence. Then she asked very carefully, "Did he actually accept money from you as rent?" "Yes." "And is that description documented?" "Yes. I made him write it down and sign it. I also wrote rent on the check." Rebecca exhaled slowly. Then she said one word I didn't expect. "Good." I stared at the phone. "Good. Victoria, listen carefully. Don't call Ethan. Don't confront Lauren. And don't tell either of them you've spoken to me." My heart began pounding. "Why bring the signed paper, a copy of the check, and anything else they've given you to my office tomorrow?" "Rebecca, what is happening?" She paused. "When Richard and you came to me 6 years ago, we put protections in place for a reason." I gripped the phone tighter. "What protections? I'll show you tomorrow." Then she added, "And Victoria, yes, your son may believe he's your landlord." A pause. "That doesn't make him the owner. I barely slept that night." Rebecca's last sentence kept circling through my mind. Your son may believe he's your landlord. That doesn't make him the owner. At 9 the next morning, I drove into Columbus with an envelope on the passenger seat. Inside were copies of everything I had collected: Ethan's signed rent statement, the copy of my 1-800 check, my notebook, the photographs of Lauren's comparative market analysis, the estimated value of my home, and a list of every account or service Ethan had changed since Richard died. Rebecca Mitchell's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building near downtown. The receptionist recognized my name and took me directly to a conference room. Rebecca entered carrying a thick file. She looked much as I remembered her silver beginning to show in her dark hair, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, calm eyes that seemed to notice everything. She hugged me. "I'm sorry about Richard. That nearly undid me. Thank you." We sat. I pushed my envelope toward her. Rebecca didn't rush. She read Ethan's handwritten statement first, then the check copy. Then she studied the photographs from Lauren's folder. When she reached the page marked Potential Strong Spring Listing, she stopped. "Did you authorize this? No. Did you ask Lauren to value the property? No. Did you ask Ethan to collect rent?" I almost laughed. "No." Rebecca leaned back. "Tell me exactly what you signed after Richard died." I described the limited financial power of attorney. She nodded. "I have a copy. Ethan told me it lets him handle things for me. It does. Does it let him do this? No." The certainty in her voice made my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Rebecca opened the thick file she'd brought with her. "Victoria, do you remember what Richard and you did here 6 years ago, estate planning? More specifically, I tried to remember." Richard had handled much of the conversation. We'd updated Will's beneficiary designations, medical directives, and several other documents. There was something involving the house. Rebecca turned a document toward me. Across the top was a name I recognized immediately: Ellis Family Residence Trust. For a moment, I simply stared. Then I looked at Rebecca. "Ellis." She nodded toward the old trust name Richard had chosen from his mother's family surname when the structure was created, a detail I had nearly forgotten. "This is the residence trust Richard and you established. The legal name never changed because there was no reason to amend it." She moved her finger down the page. "When Richard died, you became the sole acting trustee." I frowned. "What does that mean in plain English?" "It means you control the trust and the house. The trust owns the house. You control the trust." I sat very still. Rebecca continued, "You are also the lifetime beneficiary. You have the right to occupy the residence, manage it, maintain it, and make decisions regarding it under the trust terms. What about Ethan's successor beneficiary? And Natalie the same." I waited. Rebecca seemed to understand what I needed. "They may eventually benefit from trust assets after your death, according to the terms in effect at that time. But neither Ethan nor Natalie owns this house today." I felt something inside me shift. For months, Ethan had spoken with such confidence that I had begun wondering whether I'd forgotten signing something. Maybe grief had made me careless. Maybe the missing binder contained a document I no longer remembered. Rebecca pushed the trust papers closer. "You didn't give your house to Ethan." I closed my eyes. The relief was so strong it almost hurt. When I opened them again, I asked the question that had been frightening me most. "The binder is missing." "What binder?" "The original estate binder Richard kept in his office." Rebecca's expression sharpened. "When did it disappear? I don't know. Ethan had access to that room after Richard died. Do you think he took it? I don't know." Rebecca nodded. "Don't accuse him without evidence." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." Then she tapped the file. "Because legally, the missing binder doesn't give him ownership." She explained that her office retained certified copies of the executed documents and that property records supported the ownership structure. "A document disappearing from your filing cabinet doesn't rewrite the legal chain of title." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then I thought about the power of attorney. "But I did give him financial authority. Limited authority." Rebecca pulled out another document. "This allows Ethan to assist with specific financial and administrative matters. It does not transfer ownership. It does not make him trustee. Can he sell the house not for his own benefit under this authority? Can he charge me rent?" Rebecca looked at Ethan's signed statement again. "Not the way he's doing it." My eyes dropped to his signature. "Then why were you glad I paid him?" "I wasn't glad he treated you this way." She leaned forward. "I was glad you documented it." She pointed at the paper. Before this, Ethan could characterize many of his actions as assistance. Changing a service provider assistance, calling contractors assistance, helping with bills assistance. Then her finger moved to the sentence he'd written, $1,800 rent for continued occupancy of residence. "This is different, because he called it rent, because he asserted a right over your occupancy and accepted money based on that assertion." The room became very quiet. For the first time I understood what my instincts had been trying to tell me. Ethan hadn't merely been helping too much. He had begun behaving as though authority delegated to him belonged to him. "What happens now?" I asked. Rebecca closed the folder. "First we find out exactly what he's done." A chill ran through me. "You think there's more?" "I think Lauren didn't prepare that market analysis for entertainment." She turned one of the photographs toward me. "Potential strong spring listing. And I think your son didn't suddenly invent rent without believing he had some kind of leverage." I looked at the estimated value. $475,000. Rebecca. "Yes, can he somehow sign for me?" "That's one of the things we're going to examine." My stomach tightened again. She saw it. "Victoria, look at me." I did. "Today, based on the documents I have in this office, Ethan Thomas does not own your home." I felt tears reach my eyes. Not because I had been afraid of losing bricks and wood. Because for months my own son had made me feel like a visitor in the life Richard and I had built. Rebecca placed her hand over mine. "Don't confront him yet." "Why?" "Because right now he believes you don't understand your own position." She gathered Ethan's rent statement and Lauren's market analysis. "That gives us an advantage." I thought about Ethan telling me someone had to be responsible, about Lauren discussing market rent, about those two words. For now. "What do you need from me, Patience?" That wasn't the answer I wanted, but I understood it. I had spent 32 years learning that when numbers didn't match, you didn't force them to tell the story you wanted. You followed them until they told the truth. I stood to leave. At the door, I turned back. One question. Rebecca waited. "If Ethan isn't the owner, what exactly did he think he was charging me rent for?" Rebecca looked down at the signed paper. "That, Victoria, is what I intend to find out." And 3 days later, she called me with an answer far worse than I expected. The $1,800 wasn't the end of Ethan's plan. It was only the beginning. Rebecca called me 3 days later at 8:17 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was standing at the kitchen counter pouring coffee when my phone rang. "Victoria," she said, "are you alone?" I put the coffee pot down. "Yes, good. I need you to listen before you react." Those words immediately tightened my chest. "What did you find enough that I don't want you confronting Ethan yet?" I sat down. Rebecca had spent the previous days reviewing the records she could legally examine, with my authorization and comparing them with the documents I had brought her. The first discovery sounded almost harmless. Ethan had changed the mailing address connected to several household matters. Not everything, just enough. A maintenance account, a property-related notice, correspondence concerning insurance. Some information that should have reached my house had instead been directed to an address associated with Ethan's office. Can he do that, I asked? Under certain limited circumstances, acting for you might include updating contact information. The issue is the pattern, and what he appears to have been trying to accomplish. What pattern he was positioning himself as the person through whom information about the property should flow. The property. I hated that phrase more every time I heard it. Rebecca continued, in at least 2 communications, he identified himself as managing the residence on your behalf. I closed my eyes. So he made himself the property manager. He appears to have been creating that impression, and I never appointed him. Correct. The second discovery was worse. Lauren's comparative market analysis wasn't merely an informal estimate. Rebecca had found evidence that preliminary listing preparations had gone further than Lauren had admitted. There were notes about photography, suggested improvements, potential timing, a proposed spring listing window. Nothing had yet become an enforceable sale agreement, and the house had not legally been transferred or sold. But someone was preparing. How close were they, I asked. Not as close as they thought. I heard papers moving on Rebecca's end. The trust is the problem they haven't solved. The problem for them. That gave me a strange flicker of satisfaction. Lauren can prepare whatever marketing material she wants, Rebecca said, but she cannot create valid authority where none exists. A sale of trust property requires the appropriate trustee action. Me, you. I looked around my kitchen. Morning sunlight was falling across the table where Ethan had accepted my check. So they need my signature. Yes. Then why charge me rent? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. That's where I'm concerned. My fingers tightened around the phone. Tell me. We can't know their private intentions unless they tell us. But based on what you've shown me, I think they may have been trying to change the practical story around your living situation. What does that mean? Think about the language they've been using. I did. Occupancy, property, management, rent. They were turning me into a tenant. That's what it looks like. The realization made my stomach turn. If Ethan could convince me that he controlled whether I remained in the house, then every future conversation started from that false assumption. He wasn't taking my home in one dramatic act. He was teaching me to behave as if it were already his. Rebecca continued carefully. And if you eventually agreed that the house was too expensive, too large, or too difficult for you to maintain, then I leave. Yes. And they sell it. They would still face the trust requirements. But Ethan thinks his power of attorney lets him sign. That is one possibility we're examining. I remembered how confidently he had told me someone needed to be responsible. Maybe Ethan hadn't read the documents carefully. Or maybe he'd read only what he wanted to see. What happens if he tries, we stop it? Rebecca's answer was immediate. Then let's stop it now. No. I stood from the table. Rebecca, he's my son and he's trying to push me out of my house. I understand. No, I don't think you do. My voice broke. I raised him in this kitchen. His father taught him to ride a bicycle in that driveway. And now I'm supposed to sit here pretending I don't know he's preparing to sell the place for a little longer. Yes. I hated the answer. Why? Because right now Ethan believes you are passive. I am not passive. I know that. He doesn't. Silence. Rebecca lowered her voice. If you confront him today, he may stop putting things in writing. He may destroy documents. He may change his explanation. And if he's already telling himself that you're overwhelmed or confused, he may begin using that story more aggressively. The word confused struck me. Ethan had already done it. You've been under a lot of stress. You're 69 years old. You shouldn't have to manage this. Small comments. Separate, they sounded concerned. Together, they sounded like groundwork. I sat down again. What do you want me to do? Act normally. That may be the hardest thing you've asked. I know. Anything else, don't sign anything Ethan gives you. I won't. Don't give him additional financial information. All right. And document every conversation involving the house. I looked toward my notebook. Already doing it. For the first time that morning, Rebecca laughed softly. Richard always said you were the organized one. That nearly brought tears to my eyes. After we hung up, I opened the notebook. I wrote everything Rebecca had told me. Then I drew a line beneath it. For nearly an hour, I sat alone trying to accept what the evidence suggested. The rent hadn't been about $1,800. Not really. It had been about position. If Ethan was landlord, I was tenant. If Ethan was manager, I was dependent. If Ethan controlled the property, then sooner or later he could tell himself he also controlled what happened to the person living inside it. My phone rang again that afternoon. Ethan. I stared at his name before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice was cheerful, normal. "Hi, how are you? Fine. Lauren and I have been talking." My pulse quickened. "About the house. Of course, I think we finally found a way to make everything simpler." Simpler. Another word I had learned not to trust. What way I'd rather explain it in person, when tomorrow. I looked down at my notebook. "All right, great. And Mom?" "Yes, try to keep an open mind." After we hung up, I immediately called Rebecca. "He's coming tomorrow. What did he say that he found a way to make everything simpler?" Rebecca was silent for a beat. "Don't agree to anything. I won't." The next afternoon, Ethan arrived carrying a folder. He sat at my kitchen table, opened it, and slid a document toward me. Across the top were 2 words, occupancy agreement. I looked up. Ethan smiled. "This protects everybody." Then he tapped the signature line. "And I'd like it signed within 48 hours. That was when I realized my son wasn't waiting anymore. He was making his move. I stared at the words occupancy agreement for several seconds before touching the document. Ethan sat across from me as calmly as if he had brought over a restaurant menu. "Read it," he said. "You'll see it's straightforward. I always read before I sign." His mouth tightened. "I know." I picked up the first page. The language was dressed up to sound reasonable. Monthly payment, maintenance responsibilities, notice requirements, continued occupancy. Every paragraph did the same thing. It treated me as though I were living in someone else's property by permission. I turned to the second page, then the third. Ethan became impatient. "You don't have to analyze every sentence." I looked over the paper. "Then why put every sentence in there, Mom?" I continued reading. The agreement required $800 each month. It also allowed the arrangement to be reviewed if property expenses or market conditions changed. Lauren's language again. At the bottom was a signature line. Mine. I placed the document on the table. "What happens if I don't sign?" Ethan leaned back. "I don't want to make this unpleasant. That isn't an answer. We need clarity going forward. We, Lauren and me. This isn't Lauren's house. She understands property issues better than either of us." I almost corrected him. Instead, I waited. Ethan sighed. "If you're not comfortable with the arrangement, then maybe we need to discuss whether staying here makes sense. For whom? For you." There it was. The next step Rebecca had predicted. "What are you suggesting?" There are excellent assisted living communities around Columbus. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because assisted living was shameful. It wasn't. Many people needed it and benefited from it, but I didn't. I drove myself, I cooked, I managed my medications, I volunteered twice a month, I paid my bills, I maintained friendships. Ethan wasn't suggesting assisted living because I couldn't care for myself. He was suggesting it because I occupied something he wanted. "You think I need assisted living. I think you need to consider the future." I asked what you think. He looked away. "This house is a lot. You keep saying that because it's true. Is it too much for me or too valuable for you?" His head snapped toward me. What is that supposed to mean? I wanted to tell him everything. Lauren's market analysis, Rebecca, the trust, the evidence. Instead, I remembered Rebecca's warning. Not yet. So I softened my expression. "I'm tired, Ethan." His shoulders relaxed. That hurt too. My vulnerability made him comfortable. "Then let me handle this." He pushed the agreement closer. 48 hours, Mom. I nodded. "I'll think about it." After he left, I remained at the table. I thought of Ethan at 7 years old with pneumonia sleeping against my chest because lying flat made him cough. I thought of the year Richard's company cut overtime, and I took extra shifts so we could still pay for Ethan's summer baseball league. I thought of helping him move into his college dorm while he pretended not to cry when we left. Mothers collect versions of their children. The newborn, the frightened boy, the angry teenager, the young man who calls because he doesn't know how to cook chicken without drying it out. Even when that child becomes 41, all those earlier versions remain inside you. That was why betrayal by your own child felt so confusing. Part of me wanted to grab Ethan by the shoulders and ask where my boy had gone. But the woman sitting at that table had another responsibility: protect herself. I called Rebecca. He gave me an occupancy agreement. "Did you sign it?" "No good." He gave me 48 hours. Even better. I frowned. "You keep saying terrible things are good because he's documenting what he's doing." I scanned the agreement and sent it to her. Rebecca called back 20 minutes later. "Victoria, we're done waiting." Something in her voice steadied me. "What happens now? I prepare the revocation." Of the power of attorney, yes. The words landed heavily. I had given Ethan that authority because I trusted him. Taking it back felt like acknowledging a death of a different kind. Do it. I'll also prepare formal notice of your authority as sole acting trustee, and the rent we demand the $1,800 back. I almost laughed. That's the least important $1,800 I've ever lost. It still matters, I know. That evening I called Natalie. I had kept her at a distance because I didn't want suspicion turning my children against each other. Now secrecy was protecting the wrong person. I told her everything. The missing binder, Lauren's market analysis, the rent, Rebecca, the trust, the occupancy agreement. Natalie said nothing for so long I thought the call had disconnected. Then she said, I'm driving to Ohio. No. Mom, he tried to turn you into a tenant. I know. He wants your house. I know. And you're sitting there calmly? I'm trying to call Ethan. Put me on speaker. No. Why are you protecting him? I'm not protecting him. It sounds like you are. I looked at the agreement on my table. I'm protecting the truth. Natalie went quiet. If you confront him now, he'll deny everything. He'll blame Lauren. He'll say I misunderstood. He'll tell you I'm confused. He'd better not. He already has. That silenced her. Then I told her what Rebecca and I had decided. Natalie listened. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. You're really going to let him walk into this? He built it. Mom. No. My voice was stronger than I expected. He needs to hear the truth from the papers he thought didn't matter. The next morning, I met Rebecca at her office. I signed the revocation of Ethan's limited financial power of attorney. My hand didn't shake. Rebecca prepared formal notices and copies of the trust documentation. Before I left, she asked, Are you sure? Yes. That afternoon, Ethan called. Have you signed the agreement? Not yet. His irritation was immediate. Mom, we need to settle this. I agree. Then let's have a family meeting. I looked at the calendar. When's Saturday? Here. That's easiest. For you, I thought. All right. I'll bring Lauren. I paused. Good. He clearly wasn't expecting that answer. Good, yes. Bring whatever documents you think I need to see. His voice brightened. Finally. After we hung up, I called Natalie, then Rebecca. By Friday evening, everything was ready. Ethan believed Saturday's meeting would end with my signature on his occupancy agreement, and eventually my agreement to leave. He had no idea his authority had already been revoked. He had no idea Rebecca still possessed the documents he thought I had lost. And most importantly, he had no idea that when he sat down at my kitchen table the next morning, he would no longer be negotiating with a frightened widow. He would be answering to the owner of her own decisions. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of bright Ohio sunshine that made everything outside look peaceful. Inside my house, I felt as though I were waiting for a storm. I woke before 6, not because I needed to, because Richard had always been an early riser, and whenever something important happened, I still found myself following his old rhythm. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and cleaned a kitchen that was already clean. At 8, Natalie arrived from Indianapolis. She hugged me tightly. You slept enough. I didn't. That makes 2 of us. She looked toward the kitchen table. Where do you want me? Right there. And what am I supposed to do? Listen. Natalie frowned. That's going to be difficult, I know, especially if Ethan starts talking about putting you in assisted living. Natalie, fine. She raised both hands. I'll listen. At 10 exactly, Ethan's SUV pulled into my driveway. Lauren was with him. Ethan carried a black portfolio. Lauren carried her laptop and a stack of papers. They had come prepared. So had I. Ethan looked surprised when Natalie opened the door. What are you doing here? Good morning to you too. He glanced at me. Mom, I thought this was supposed to be a discussion about your living arrangements. It is. Then why is Natalie here? Because she's family. Lauren stepped inside. That might actually be useful. Everyone should understand what's happening. Natalie smiled without warmth. Oh, I intend to. I touched her arm. Listen. She understood. We sat around the kitchen table, my kitchen table. I reminded myself of that as Ethan opened his portfolio. He placed the occupancy agreement in front of me, still unsigned. Then he produced a spreadsheet. I put together a breakdown so you can see why the current situation isn't sustainable. I looked at the columns: property taxes, insurance, estimated maintenance, utilities, landscaping, projected repairs. He had turned my home into a business report. Lauren opened her laptop. We've also looked at what comparable homes in Worthington are doing. I looked at her. Have you? She didn't catch the meaning. Yes, the market remains strong. Natalie shifted beside me. I felt her anger without looking at her. Ethan pointed to his spreadsheet. The point is, Mom maintaining this house doesn't make financial sense for one person. I'm paying the expenses. That's not the whole picture. What is the whole picture? Lauren answered. Equity. There was the word again. She turned her laptop toward me. A presentation showed recent neighborhood sales. If this property were properly prepared, it could perform very well. Perform as an asset. I looked around my kitchen. To Lauren, the cabinets were dated. The floors needed refinishing. The backyard was square footage. To me, Richard was still laughing beside the sink because he'd installed the faucet backward the first time. I turned back. And where would I go? Ethan leaned forward. We've researched that too. Of course they had. He pulled out another sheet. 3 senior living communities. 1 in Dublin, 1 near Westerville, 1 farther north. These are excellent facilities. Facilities communities. Do I need one? Ethan sighed. This isn't about what you need today. It's about planning responsibly. Natalie finally spoke. Whose responsibility? Ethan looked at her. Please don't start. I'm asking a question. Natalie. I touched her hand. She stopped. I turned to Ethan. If I moved, what happens to the house? He glanced at Lauren. We sell it. Finally. No euphemism. No, maybe someday. Sell it. And once it sells, where does the money go? Ethan blinked. What do you mean? The proceeds. Obviously, everything would be handled appropriately. That isn't an answer. His jaw tightened. It stays in the family. I looked directly into his eyes. Which family? Silence. Lauren closed her laptop halfway. Ethan stared at me. I don't understand the question. Yes, you do. Mom, you're making this confrontational. No, I'm asking who receives the money from selling the house. You're not looking at the bigger picture. Then show me. He pushed the occupancy agreement toward me. First, we need to establish the current arrangement. After that, we can work through the transition. Transition. There it was. Rent had never been the destination. It was the bridge. Turn me into an occupant. Normalize Ethan's control. Move me out. Sell the house. Lauren leaned toward me. Victoria, nobody is trying to take anything from you. I looked at her. Then why did you prepare a comparative market analysis without telling me? Her face went white. Ethan froze. Natalie turned toward me. For the first time that morning, nobody had an answer. Lauren recovered first. What comparative market analysis? The black folder you left beside that chair. I pointed. The one estimating this house at around $475,000. The one with notes about neutral paint, refinishing floors, and a strong spring listing. Ethan turned sharply toward his wife. You left that here. That question told me everything, not, what are you talking about? Not, there is no analysis. You left that here. Lauren stared at him. Ethan, he realized his mistake. Mom, you're misunderstanding. No. My voice was quiet. I think I've finally stopped misunderstanding. Ethan closed the portfolio. This is exactly why I was worried about having these conversations without someone helping you interpret things. Natalie stiffened. I felt something cold move through me. There it was. Confusion, age, interpretation. The story Rebecca warned me he might use. I understand perfectly well. I'm not saying you don't. You just did. I said these issues are complicated. For whom Ethan pushed his chair back slightly. Maybe we should reschedule when everyone is calmer. No. He looked at me. We're going to finish. Lauren checked her watch. Victoria, if you aren't comfortable signing today? The doorbell rang. Nobody moved. Ethan glanced toward the foyer. Are you expecting someone? Yes? Who? I folded my hands on the table. My guest. Natalie looked down, hiding the beginning of a smile. The bell rang again. I stood. Ethan watched me walk toward the door. When I opened it, Rebecca Mitchell was standing on the porch carrying a leather briefcase and a thick document folder. Good morning, Victoria. Good morning, Rebecca. I stepped aside. She entered. Ethan was already standing when we returned to the kitchen. His expression changed the moment he saw the briefcase. Who's this Rebecca? Placed it beside an empty chair. My name is Rebecca Mitchell. Lauren's face tightened. She recognized the type of meeting before Ethan did. Rebecca sat down. Ethan remained standing. Why is there a lawyer here? I returned to my chair. Rebecca calmly opened her briefcase. I'm here at Victoria's request. For what? She removed a certified document. For several things. Ethan looked at me. Mom, what did you do? I held his gaze. Something I should have done months ago. Rebecca placed the first document on the table. Then she looked directly at Ethan. For clarity, Mr. Thomas, I represent Victoria Thomas in her capacity as the sole acting trustee responsible for this residence. Ethan's face went blank. Lauren stopped breathing for a second. And for the first time since my son had decided he was entitled to manage my home, he had absolutely nothing to say. Ethan stared at Rebecca as though she had started speaking another language. Sole acting trustee, Rebecca didn't repeat herself. Instead, she opened the certified document and turned it toward him. Yes, Ethan looked at me. What is she talking about? I said nothing. For months, Ethan had explained my own house to me. Now he could listen. Rebecca tapped the first document. This residence is held by the Ellis Family Residence Trust, established by Richard and Victoria Thomas 6 years ago. Following Richard Thomas's death, Victoria became the sole acting trustee under the trust terms. Lauren leaned forward. I thought Ethan had power of attorney. He did. Rebecca's emphasis on the past tense changed Ethan's expression. What does that mean, Rebecca removed another document? It means the limited financial power of attorney previously granted to you has been formally revoked. Ethan looked at me. You revoked it, yes. Without telling me, I almost laughed. You changed accounts without telling me. That's completely different. Is it? Rebecca intervened. Mr. Thomas, whether you approve of the revocation is irrelevant. Your authority under that document has ended. Ethan sat back down. This is ridiculous. No, Rebecca said. It's quite straightforward. She placed the trust documents beside the revocation. Your mother's position is equally straightforward. You do not own this house. Ethan's jaw tightened. I never said I owned it. I reached into the folder beside me and removed his signed rent statement. Then I placed it in front of him. Rebecca said you asserted the right to charge Victoria Thomas $1,800 for continued occupancy of this residence. Ethan barely looked at the paper. That was for expenses. That's not what you wrote. Rebecca pointed to his handwriting. $1,800 rent for a continued occupancy of residence. Ethan's face reddened. It's semantics. It became considerably less semantic when you accepted payment. Lauren looked at him. You actually wrote rent? He turned toward her. You knew what we were doing. I didn't tell you to put that in writing. I watched them. For months they had operated like a team. Now that consequences had entered the room, the distance between them appeared instantly. Rebecca placed a copy of my check beside Ethan's statement. The payment must be returned. Ethan scoffed. Fine. I'll give her $1,800. Is that what this whole performance is about? No, I said. He looked at me. The money is the smallest part. Then what do you want? I want you to understand what you did. I helped you. You charged me rent. I managed this house for months because I let you help. You couldn't handle everything after Dad died. The words hung between us. I felt Natalie stiffen beside me. Rebecca remained silent. This part wasn't legal. This part was mine. I was grieving, I said. Yes, I was not incompetent. I never said you were. You implied it every time I questioned you. That's not true. You told me I was stressed. You reminded me of my age. You suggested I couldn't manage this house because you shouldn't have to. His voice rose. I didn't raise mine. That's different from saying I can't. Ethan looked away. Rebecca opened another section of her file. There is also the matter of potential marketing activity involving the residents. Lauren's expression changed. I haven't listed the property. No one said you completed a listing. I prepared market information. That's normal in my profession. For clients, I said. She turned toward me. You were thinking about your options. No, you were. Lauren closed her laptop. This is getting absurd. Rebecca's voice stayed calm. Then there should be no difficulty confirming that all preparation toward listing transfer or sale will cease immediately unless authorized by Victoria in her capacity as trustee. Lauren looked at Ethan. He didn't answer. Rebecca continued. Any attempt to use the former power of attorney to represent otherwise would be improper. Relevant parties will receive notice that Ethan's authority has been revoked. That was when Ethan finally lost control. He shoved his spreadsheet aside. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I looked at him. Yes. No, you don't. Natalie started to speak. I touched her wrist. Not yet. Ethan pointed toward the windows. This house is worth almost $500,000, and you're sitting here acting like protecting it from me is some victory. There it was. Not protecting it for me. Protecting it from him. Why shouldn't I protect it from you? His face twisted. Because I'm your son. That's exactly why I shouldn't have needed to. Silence. Ethan stood again. Dad would never have done this. My grief flashed into anger. Don't use your father. He wanted us taken care of. He wanted me taken care of, too. Of course. No, Ethan, not of course. You forgot that part. He stared at me. Then he said the sentence that finally exposed everything underneath the excuses. I was protecting my inheritance. Nobody moved. Lauren slowly turned toward him. Natalie inhaled sharply. Even Rebecca stopped arranging her papers. I repeated his words. Your inheritance. Ethan seemed to realize what he'd admitted. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, Mom. No, I stood. For the first time that morning, my voice shook, but not from fear. An inheritance is what someone chooses to leave you. It is not permission to take from them while they are still alive. Ethan's face went pale. You think I was stealing from you? I think you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as the person standing between you and something you wanted. That isn't fair. Was charging me rent fair? He had no answer. I pointed toward the table. That house you priced, the one Lauren walked strangers through, the one you wanted me to leave so you could make everything simpler. Richard and I paid for it with 30 years of work. I know that. Then act like you know. Ethan lowered his eyes. For months I had imagined this moment as satisfying. It wasn't. Watching your child discover that you can see exactly who he has become doesn't feel like victory. It feels like mourning. Rebecca slid one final document toward Ethan. This confirms the revocation and requests repayment of the 1-800. You will also cease representing yourself as having authority over the residence. Ethan didn't touch it. Lauren closed her laptop completely. I think we should leave. Ethan looked at me. Is that what you want? I thought about the boy I'd raised. Then the man who had called me an occupant. Yes. He flinched. As Ethan reached the doorway, I spoke again. One more thing. He stopped. You keep calling this house your inheritance. He turned. I held his gaze. You shouldn't. Something changed in his face. For the first time that day, Ethan looked afraid. What does that mean? I didn't answer. Not yet. Because there was one decision Richard and I had once discussed that my son knew nothing about. And after everything Ethan had done, I was finally ready to make it. After Ethan and Lauren left, the house became so quiet I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Natalie stood near the window, watching their SUV disappear down the street. Rebecca remained at the table, gathering documents into neat stacks. I sat in Richard's old chair. For months I had imagined what it would feel like when Ethan finally learned the truth. I thought I would feel powerful. Instead, I felt exhausted. Natalie turned around. Mom, what did you mean I knew exactly what she was asking? What when you told Ethan he shouldn't call this house his inheritance? Rebecca looked at me but said nothing. I ran my hand across the wooden table. Your father and I talked about this years ago. Natalie sat down. About Ethan, about both of you. Her eyebrows rose. Rebecca closed her folder. Victoria, this part is yours to explain. I nodded. Richard had loved our children fiercely, but love had never made him blind. About 7 years before his death, Ethan had come to us asking for money after a business investment went wrong. Richard helped him, but afterward, he worried about the way Ethan spoke about money. Not because Ethan wanted success. Richard admired ambition. What troubled him was Ethan's growing belief that future family assets were somehow part of his present financial security. One night after Ethan left, Richard said something I never forgot. I don't want our children waiting for us to die so their lives can begin. I had scolded him. That's a terrible thing to say. I'm not saying they want us dead. Then what are you saying? That inheritance can become poison if someone starts spending it in their mind before it belongs to them. That conversation eventually helped lead us to Rebecca. We created the trust primarily to protect me if Richard died first and to make the transfer of our estate orderly. But Richard had insisted on safeguards. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I understood. Natalie listened quietly. Dad knew he worried. About Ethan. About what money might do to all of us. She looked down. Me too. Yes. Natalie seemed almost offended. I smiled sadly. Your father believed good documents should protect people from temptation, not just bad people. Rebecca nodded. That was very much Richard's philosophy. I looked at her. And now I want to change what happens to the house. Natalie immediately shook her head. Mom, don't do anything because you're angry. I won't. I mean it. Don't cut Ethan out just to punish him. I'm not planning to. That surprised her. After everything that had happened, part of me wanted Ethan to feel the same loss of control he'd tried to force on me. But revenge was not the legacy I wanted Richard's home to carry. I don't want either of you inheriting this house directly. Natalie stared at me. Neither of us, neither. She was silent. Then she nodded slowly. Okay. That simple answer almost made me cry. No argument, no calculation, no question about what she was losing. Just okay. Rebecca opened her notebook. What would you like to happen instead? I had been thinking about it for weeks. Since Richard died, I had met widows who suddenly didn't know where their financial documents were. Women whose husbands had handled every account. Women terrified of online banking. Women who signed papers because their children said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll handle it." I had nearly become one of them. I want the house sold after I die, I said. Natalie watched me. And then a significant portion of the proceeds goes somewhere useful. What kind of useful housing assistance? Rebecca stopped writing. For whom? Older widows, women at risk of losing their homes, women who need legal or financial help before somebody decides they're too old to understand what belongs to them. Natalie's eyes filled. Mom, I mean it. Rebecca leaned back. That can be structured. The rest can be distributed according to the estate plan. To Ethan and me, Natalie asked, with conditions Rebecca and I will determine. Natalie nodded again. No protest. That mattered more than she knew. 2 days later, I returned to Rebecca's office. We spent nearly 3 hours discussing the changes. I didn't erase Ethan from my life with a pen. I didn't want that kind of justice, but I made one decision permanent in spirit: neither child would receive the house itself. The home Richard and I had built would eventually become something larger than an inheritance. It would help protect people who felt as frightened and displaced as I had. Rebecca looked at me across her desk. Are you certain? Yes. This may be difficult for Ethan. So was being charged rent in my own house. Rebecca almost smiled. Fair point. The updated plan took time to complete properly, but my intention was clear. When Ethan eventually learned what I had decided, he called me. I nearly let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Mom. His voice was tight. Rebecca sent me a notice about the estate changes. She sent you what was appropriate. You changed what happens to the house. Yes. So Natalie doesn't get it either, no. A pause. Why? Because this isn't about choosing your sister over you. Then who are you choosing? I looked around the living room, at Richard's books, at the photographs, at the walls that had held our family for decades. I'm choosing what your father and I spent our lives building to mean something. It already means something. To you it became a dollar amount. That isn't fair. Maybe not. But it's true. He breathed heavily. So after you die, strangers get what Dad built. People who need help will receive part of what we leave behind. And your children, you'll receive what I decide to leave you under the plan. His voice hardened. You're punishing me. No, Ethan. I spoke quietly. You are experiencing a consequence for trying to help you, for trying to own something before it was yours. Silence. Then he said Dad would have wanted me to have that house. I closed my eyes. No, your father wanted you to become the kind of man who didn't need to take it from me. Ethan hung up. I sat there holding the phone for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt free. My son had spent months trying to turn my home into his future inheritance. Instead, he had forced me to decide what that home truly represented. And now, no matter what happened between Ethan and me, one thing was certain. The house he had tried so hard to control would never become his private reward. It would become protection for someone else. For almost 4 months, Ethan didn't call me. No Sunday visits, no messages asking whether the gutters had been cleaned. No reminders about insurance, no cheerful voice telling me he had already handled something I had never asked him to handle. Lauren disappeared too. At first the silence hurt. Then slowly it began to feel like space. Natalie came from Indianapolis the weekend after the confrontation and helped me reclaim every part of my life that I had gradually handed over. We changed passwords, every one of them. I contacted the utility companies and restored my phone number as the primary contact. Rebecca made sure the revocation of Ethan's authority reached the appropriate people. I reviewed my insurance, my tax records, my bank information, my service accounts. Nothing was left to assumption. Then I called a locksmith. Natalie watched him replace the locks on the front and back doors. You okay? She asked. I held the new key in my palm. Yes, you don't look okay. I never thought I'd change the locks because of my own son. Natalie's expression softened. You're not punishing him, I know, and I did. Changing the locks wasn't revenge. It was a boundary made of metal. For the first time since Richard died, every person who entered my home would do so because I had chosen to let them in. The months passed. Spring came to Worthington. The hydrangeas Richard planted began turning green again. I hired Mr. Alvarez back to take care of the yard. When he arrived, he grinned. Mrs. Thomas, I thought you moved. My stomach tightened. Who told you that? He shrugged. Your son said there might be changes. I stood very still. Then I smiled. No changes. Mr. Alvarez looked toward the house. Good. That evening I wrote the conversation in my notebook, not because I still needed evidence, because I never again wanted to forget how easily someone else's plans could begin replacing your own when you stopped paying attention. Then one Thursday afternoon in May, the doorbell rang. I looked through the front window. Ethan, alone. No Lauren, no folder, no laptop, no papers. Just my son standing on the porch. For several seconds I didn't move. He rang again. I opened the door but kept one hand on the frame. Hi, Mom. Hello, Ethan. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired fixed by sleep. His suit was gone. He wore jeans and a plain blue shirt. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. 4 months earlier, Ethan would have opened the door with his own key. Now he had to ask. That mattered. "Yes." I stepped aside. He walked into the living room and glanced around. "Looks the same." "It is." He nodded. Then he noticed the new lock. He said nothing. We sat across from each other. Ethan rubbed his hands together. "I brought something." My body immediately tensed. Then he reached into his pocket and removed an envelope. He placed it on the coffee table. Inside was a check, $1,800. I stared at it. The rent. He nodded. "I should have returned it sooner." "Yes, I was angry. I know." He looked down. "That's not an excuse." "No." For once, Ethan didn't defend himself. That frightened me almost more than his anger had. "What happened?" I asked. He leaned back. "My company had a bad year. I waited. 2 projects went sideways. My commissions dropped. Lauren and I had debt. How much enough?" "Did you think selling my house would solve it?" His eyes closed briefly. "Yes." The honesty hurt. He continued. "At first I didn't think of it like that." "How did you think of it?" "That the house would be mine someday. And that made it yours now." "No." He swallowed, but I started acting like it did. I said nothing. The more worried I got about money, the more I kept thinking about the equity. Lauren talked about what it could sell for. I started telling myself, you didn't need all this space, so you could need the money instead. His face tightened. "Yes." It was the first time he had admitted it without disguising it as concern. I kept telling myself I was helping you plan. "You were planning around me, I know." "And the rent?" He stared at the floor. "I thought if you accepted the arrangement, everything afterward would be easier." There it was. The truth Rebecca had suspected. Make me an occupant. Make him the authority. Then make leaving seem like the logical next step. "Were you going to put me in assisted living, Namboy?" I raised an eyebrow. Ethan corrected himself. "I would have tried to convince you, even though I didn't need it." "Yes." My chest ached. He looked at me. "I don't know when I became that person. I do." He waited. "When you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing my house as the answer to your problems." His eyes filled. I had rarely seen Ethan cry as an adult. "I'm sorry, I believed he meant it. But sincerity doesn't automatically rebuild trust." "What do you want from me?" "Nothing, Ethan. I mean it." He pushed the check closer. "I don't want money. I don't want you to change the estate plan back." That surprised me. "Lauren knows you're here." He looked away. "We're having problems. I didn't ask more. Their marriage was not mine to repair. I've started financial counseling," he said. "I'm working through the debt." "Good. I thought maybe you could help me figure some of it out." There it was. A request. Old Victoria might have reached for her checkbook. Instead, I asked help how he understood, not money. I waited. "Maybe just look at the numbers with me sometime." I felt something soften. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the smallest beginning of it. "I can look," I said. His eyes lifted. "That's all. That's what I'm offering." He nodded. "Okay." Ethan stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I looked at the man in front of me and still saw the boy I'd raised somewhere inside him. "I can forgive my son." Relief appeared on his face too quickly. I finished. "But I will never again finance the man you became." His relief disappeared. Then slowly he nodded. "I understand. Do you?" "I'm trying to." That was enough for that day. I opened the door. Ethan stepped onto the porch. This time he didn't ask for a key. He didn't mention the trust. He didn't mention inheritance. He simply said, "Bye, Mom. Goodbye, Ethan." I watched him walk to his car. Then I closed the door and turned the new lock. Not because I hated my son, because forgiveness and access were two different things. It had taken me 69 years to learn that boundaries didn't mean closing your heart. Sometimes they were the only way to open it again safely. A year after Ethan handed me back that $1,800, I was still living in my house in Worthington. Not surviving there, living there. There is a difference. For months after Richard died, every room had reminded me of what I'd lost. Then during the worst of what happened with Ethan, those same rooms began to feel like territory I had to defend. Eventually, they became home again. I changed Richard's office first. Not completely. His drafting ruler stayed on the shelf. His old Ohio State mug remained beside the window. Our 35th anniversary photograph still sat on the bookcase. But I added a second desk. Rebecca helped me connect with a local nonprofit that supported older adults dealing with housing and financial insecurity. I wasn't a lawyer, and I never pretended to be one. What I could do was help people organize. That was something I understood. Once or twice a month, Women came to my house carrying boxes of statements, insurance letters, passwords written on scraps of paper, and documents they were afraid to read. Many were widows. One woman named Carol sat across from me clutching a folder and whispered, "My daughter says I shouldn't worry about any of this anymore." I knew that sentence, not the exact words, the feeling behind them. I asked her one question. "Do you want your daughter helping you or deciding for you?" Carol stared at me. Then she began to cry. I reached across the desk and held her hand. That became the purpose of Richard's old office. Not telling people to distrust their children. Not teaching them to fight their families. Reminding them that needing help didn't erase their voice. Rebecca handled anything requiring actual legal advice. I handled folders, questions, lists, and sometimes fear. Natalie joked that I'd come out of retirement without getting paid. Maybe she was right, but I had something better than a paycheck. I had usefulness. Natalie still visited from Indianapolis. The difference was that she asked before doing things. "Want me to call the plumber? Want help with the insurance form? Do you want company at Rebecca's office?" That word mattered. Ethan was changing too, slowly. He remained in financial counseling and began working through the debts that had frightened him into seeing my home as a rescue plan. I never paid them. Not $1. That was important for both of us. Our relationship rebuilt itself through small things. A phone call on Sunday, coffee on the porch, a birthday dinner where nobody discussed money. Trust, I learned, doesn't return because someone apologizes. It returns when their behavior stops requiring you to protect yourself from them. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan came over carrying a toolbox. I opened the door. He pointed toward the porch. "That bottom step is loose." "I know. Can I fix it?" The question made me smile. "Can you?" He laughed. "I work around contractors all day. I think I can manage one step." Then yes. I brought him lemonade while he worked. For nearly an hour we talked about ordinary things. Baseball, the weather, Natalie's latest visit. Not once did Ethan mention the trust. Not once did he mention the value of the house. Not once did he call it the property. When he finished, he tested the step twice. "Solid. Your father would have tested it 3 times. Ethan smiled. "Yeah." Then his expression changed. "I miss him. So do I." We sat on the porch. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan looked at the house. "I've been thinking about something." I waited. "The rent." I felt myself tense slightly. He noticed. "Not the money." "All right." He rubbed his palms together. "I keep remembering you sitting at that table writing me the check." "So do I. I thought I'd won." The admission surprised me. Won what control, I guess. He shook his head. "I told myself it was responsibility, that I was doing what Dad would have done. Your father never charged me rent, I know." A sad laugh escaped him. Then he became serious. "Mom, I'm sorry I made you feel like a guest in your own home." I looked at my son. For months I'd wanted him to understand exactly that. Now that he did, I didn't need to punish him with it. "You didn't make me a guest, Ethan." He waited. "You just made me remember that I was the one who still had the key." His eyes dropped, then he nodded. "I deserved that. It wasn't meant to hurt you. I know." I looked toward the front yard. Richard's hydrangeas were blooming. "Your father and I spent years building this life. After he died, I thought letting you handle things meant I didn't have to feel so alone." Ethan listened. "I confused being cared for with giving up control, and I took advantage of it. Yes, I didn't soften the truth, but I didn't sharpen it either. What happens with the house someday isn't the important part anymore." He looked at me. "I understand. Do you?" "I think I'm starting to." That was enough. Before leaving, Ethan packed his tools. At the doorway, he stopped. "Need anything else?" A year earlier, that question would have frightened me. Now I smiled. "If I do, I'll ask." He smiled back. Okay. After his car disappeared, I remained on the porch. The house behind me was worth more money than Richard and I had ever imagined when we bought it. But its greatest value had nothing to do with equity. It had taught me something. A home isn't truly yours because your name appears on the paperwork. It is yours when you are allowed to live inside it with dignity, choice, and a voice. And love isn't proven by surrendering those things. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes forgiveness means keeping the new locks. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to rescue them from consequences they need to face. I had made one quiet phone call because my son tried to turn me into a tenant. That call saved more than my house. It gave me back the part of myself grief had convinced me I no longer needed. My authority, my confidence, my voice, and most importantly, it taught me that I could forgive Ethan without returning to the woman who had been afraid to question him. That evening, I locked the front door and placed my key on the little wooden tray Richard had made years ago. I touched it and smiled. For the first time in a very long while, the house was quiet without feeling empty. It was simply mine to live in, on my terms. Looking back, I learned that betrayal doesn't always arrive looking cruel. Sometimes it arrives carrying groceries. Sometimes it fixes your porch, organizes your bills, and says, "Let me make things easier for you." Help becomes dangerous when it stops asking what you want. I loved Ethan before he tried to control my home. I loved him while I was fighting to take that control back. And I loved him afterward. But love did not require me to surrender my dignity. Getting older does not make your voice less valuable. Grieving does not make you incompetent. Needing help does not mean someone else gets to become the author of your life. And forgiveness does not mean restoring the same access someone once abused. I didn't need to destroy my son to find justice. I needed to stop him. I needed him to face the consequences of what he'd done, and I needed to remember that the life Richard and I built still belonged to me while I was alive to live it. That quiet phone call to Rebecca wasn't revenge, it was a boundary. And sometimes the quietest boundary changes everything. So let me ask you something. If your own child charged you rent to stay in the home you had spent your life paying for, what would you have done? Would you confront them, immediately walk away, or pay them once and make the quiet phone call I made? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know where you believe help ends and control begins. And if this story reminded you that dignity has no expiration date, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal, courage, justice, and finding the strength to stand up for yourself. Because sometimes protecting your home isn't about protecting four walls. It's about protecting the person you still have every right to be.